The morning sun peeked through the curtains as Elaine Matthews stared at her reflection in the old vanity mirror. 62 years of life had left their mark, silver strands weaving through her once chestnut hair, laugh lines framing her warm brown eyes. Today was different from the thousands of mornings that came before. Today, after decades of teaching others to shine, she would play at Harrington Music Hall. She ran her fingers over the worn leather of her music case, a gift from her mother 30 years ago. Inside lay sheets of music she had composed during quiet evenings after her students had gone home. Melodies that no one except her cat Beethoven had ever heard. "It's just for fun," she whispered to herself, straightening the simple blue dress she had chosen for the occasion. "Just to say I did it once." The drive to the city took nearly 2 hours from her small town of Pine Ridge. Each mile marker brought a fresh wave of doubt. What was she thinking? Open recitals at Harrington were technically for everyone, but everyone knew they attracted the finest musicians in the region. Conservatory graduates, accomplished composers, prodigies bound for greater stages, not piano teachers from nowhere towns who played at church on Sundays. The imposing stone building came into view as she rounded the corner. 6 massive columns guarded the entrance like sentinels, and a steady stream of people flowed through the ornate doors. Musicians carried expensive instruments in pristine cases. Attendees wore outfits that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. Elaine parked her 15-year-old sedan in the furthest corner of the lot. She checked her lipstick one last time, gathered her courage along with her music case, and stepped out into the cool autumn air. "You belong here too," she reminded herself, her mother's words from long ago. Music doesn't care about fancy degrees or important names. The grand foyer buzzed with activity. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors, and the soft murmur of cultured voices filled the space. Young performers huddled in groups, nervous energy making their movements quick and bird-like. Older musicians stood with straight backs and confident smiles, greeting each other like old friends. No one noticed Elaine. She clutched her case closer and approached the registration table, where a young man with stylish glasses was checking in performers. "Name?" he asked without looking up from his tablet. "Elaine Matthews," she replied, her voice smaller than she intended. The young man scrolled through his list, frowning slightly. "Matthews, yes. Last-minute addition. You're number 23. 23. The very last slot of the day, when most of the audience would have already left and those remaining would be checking their watches." "The waiting area is through those doors," he said, already looking past her to the next person in line. "Performers only beyond this point. Guests need to use the main entrance to the hall." "I'm performing," Elaine said, but he had already turned away. The performers' waiting area was a large room with plush sofas and elegant side tables. A baby grand piano stood in one corner for last-minute practice. The space hummed with the sound of musicians warming up, scales and arpeggios floating through the air, creating a chaotic symphony. Elaine found an empty chair in the corner and sat down, placing her case gently on her lap. Across the room stood a tall man with silver-streaked black hair and a commanding presence. Even without the program in her hand, she would have recognized Thomas Wells, the famous conductor who had transformed Harrington's orchestra into one of the most respected in the country. He moved through the crowd like royalty, stopping to speak with certain performers. A young woman in a stunning red dress played a complex passage on her violin, while he listened intently. When she finished, he nodded and offered a few words that made her beam with pride. 2 hours passed. Elaine watched as performers were called one by one. Thomas Wells spoke with almost everyone. A word of encouragement here, a piece of advice there. His keen eyes missed nothing except her. When he passed near her chair, she gathered her courage and stood up. "Mr. Wells," she began, "I just wanted to introduce—" "One moment," he said, not unkindly but with dismissal clear in his tone. He continued past her to greet a young man with a cello who had just arrived. Elaine slowly sat back down, her face warm with embarrassment. Of course, why would someone like Thomas Wells care about someone like her? She was nobody in this world. A woman with a clipboard appeared in the doorway. "Numbers 15 through 20, please prepare. We're running slightly behind schedule." Elaine checked her watch. It was already past 4. Her slot wouldn't come until well after 6 if they stayed on the current pace. Her stomach growled. reminding her that she'd been too nervous to eat lunch before driving to the city. She slipped out to find the restroom and perhaps a vending machine. The hallway outside was quieter, the sounds of the recital drifting faintly from the main hall. Following signs, she located a small lounge area with a coffee station and a few prepackaged sandwiches. As she unwrapped a sad-looking cheese sandwich, she noticed a framed photograph on the wall, a black and white image of Harrington's orchestra from decades ago. Her heart skipped as she recognized a familiar face in the back row holding a flute. Her mother, Grace. Mom had played here for 3 seasons before giving it up to marry Dad and move to his hometown. She had taught music at the local school and given private lessons, including Elaine's first. "Music is life breathing through notes," she used to say. Elaine touched the photograph gently. "I made it here, Mom," she whispered. When she returned to the waiting area, there was a flurry of activity. A young woman was being helped to a sofa, her face pale and drawn with pain. "I can't," the woman was saying. "My migraine. I can't see properly." Thomas Wells stood nearby, his brow furrowed with concern and frustration. Jennifer was our featured pianist for the second half. The Times critic is here specifically to hear her. "I'm so sorry," Jennifer said, her voice tight with pain. "I can't play like this." A woman with a clipboard, Elaine now recognized her as the event coordinator, spoke urgently. "We need to rearrange the program. We can't leave a 30-minute gap before the final pieces." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "Who can fill the slot? It needs to be something substantial, not just a 5-minute piece." The coordinator scanned her list. "Most of our longer pieces have already performed. We have a few remaining, but they're scheduled for specific—" Her eyes landed on Elaine. "Wait, number 23 has a 15-minute original composition. If we move her up, we only need to find Phil for the remaining time." Thomas followed her gaze, his eyes landing on Elaine for what felt like the first time. She saw the doubt cross his face, the quick assessment and dismissal. "The piano teacher from—" He glanced at the clipboard. "Pine Ridge?" "Yes," the coordinator confirmed. "Her registration indicates an original composition of substantial length." Thomas sighed. "Fine, it's better than dead air. Make the announcement." The coordinator approached Elaine, her smile professional but tight. "Ms. Matthews? We have a situation. Would you be able to perform now rather than in your assigned slot?" Elaine's heart hammered against her ribs. "Now, but I was expecting 2 more hours to prepare." "I understand it's sudden, but we have an emergency. Jennifer Yoon can't perform and we need to fill her featured slot." She lowered her voice. "It's an important audience today." Behind her, Elaine could see Thomas Wells watching with poorly concealed skepticism. She heard him mutter to an assistant, "At least people expect less from unknowns." A lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, and politely dismissed flashed through Elaine's mind. 62 years of good enough but never exceptional. Decades of teaching others to reach for greatness, while telling herself that supporting dreams was enough. Her fingers touched the worn case in her lap, feeling the music inside. Pieces of her soul translated into notes and rests. Music that had kept her company through lonely nights after her husband passed, through empty days when her only child moved across the country. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "I'll play now." The coordinator nodded with visible relief. "Wonderful. You'll be announced in 5 minutes. The stage manager will show you where to wait." As Elaine gathered her music and followed the stage manager, she passed Thomas Wells. He gave her a brief nod. The kind one gives out of obligation rather than respect. "Just play cleanly," he said. "No need for anything fancy. The audience is here for the orchestra pieces after the intermission anyway." The kindly dismissal stung worse than outright rudeness would have. The assumption that she couldn't possibly offer anything worth truly listening to. The stage manager led her to the wings, where she could see the magnificent grand piano waiting on stage, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcement. "Due to an unexpected illness, there has been a change in our program. Jennifer Yoon will not be performing this evening. Instead, we are pleased to present Elaine Matthews performing her original composition, Memories in Minor." The applause was polite but unenthusiastic. Elaine saw people checking their programs, whispering to each other, "Who is Elaine Matthews?" As she stepped onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinded her. She could make out only the first few rows, faces watching with polite indifference. Further back, she caught a glimpse of Thomas Wells taking his seat, already looking at his watch. The walk to the piano felt endless. Her sensible shoes made soft sounds against the wooden floor. Her blue dress suddenly felt painfully plain among the evening wear she had glimpsed in the audience. But when she sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, something shifted inside her. This was her moment. Perhaps her only one on a stage like this. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes flowed from Elaine's fingers like water over smooth stones. Gentle, hesitant at first, much like herself. The melody was simple, a quiet introduction that belied the complexity to come. Her shoulders relaxed as the familiar comfort of music embraced her. Then she fumbled. A wrong note rang out, sharp and jarring in the perfect acoustics of Harrington Hall. Her eyes flew open in horror. In the front row, an older woman with an elaborate pearl necklace frowned. Nearby, a man in an expensive suit glanced at his companion and raised an eyebrow. From her peripheral vision, Elaine could see Thomas Wells shift in his seat, his expression confirming what she already knew. He had been right to dismiss her. Sweat prickled along her hairline. 62 years old, and here she was, making a fool of herself on the most prestigious stage she'd ever encountered. What had she been thinking? Her mother's voice drifted through her mind. When you make a mistake, don't apologize. Make it part of the music. Elaine took a deep breath and closed her eyes again. She let her fingers find their place on the keys, restarting the phrase. This time, instead of fighting her nervousness, she let it flow into the music, transforming anxiety into a trembling urgency that gave the melody new life. As she played through the introduction again, memories washed over her. She was 7 years old, sitting beside her mother at their old upright piano, struggling to reach the pedals. She was 16, playing at her first recital, her father beaming from the front row. She was 28, teaching her first student, a shy little boy who would later become the music director at Pine Ridge High School. Each memory flowed through her fingers, infusing the notes with something textbooks couldn't teach. The piece moved from its simple beginning into more complex passages that spoke of life's unexpected turns, of dreams deferred but not forgotten, of quiet passion that burned steadily through decades without fanfare. She forgot about Thomas Wells and his dismissive glance, forgot about the critic from the Times and the audience checking their watches. In that moment, there was only Elaine and the piano, a conversation 60 years in the making. The middle section of her composition swelled with unexpected power. She had written it during the dark months after her husband Robert's passing, channeling grief into sound. Her fingers struck the keys with newfound confidence, building chords that resonated throughout the hall. The piece demanded technical skill she had quietly mastered over a lifetime of teaching it to others. Unknown to the audience, hidden in the complex harmonies was a lullaby she had sung to her daughter, now living halfway across the country with grandchildren Elaine rarely saw. Woven through the bass line was the folk melody her father had whistled while working in his garden. Each note carried pieces of her heart. 4 minutes into her performance, something shifted in the room. The rustling of programs ceased. The subtle coughing and shifting that accompanies any live performance faded away. A collective breath seemed to be held Elaine didn't notice. Her world had narrowed to the music, to the story she was telling without words. Her body swayed slightly as the piece moved into its most challenging section, a series of runs that cascaded like rainfall, building toward the emotional peak of the composition. Her hands, marked with age spots and the slight bend of early arthritis, moved with surprising agility across the keys. These weren't the hands of a concert pianist, kept limber through daily hours of practice on the finest instruments. These were the hands of a woman who had played on an old upright between loads of laundry, who had taught countless children with patience and kindness, who had kept music alive in a small town where arts funding had dried up decades ago. Yet they were strong hands, capable hands, hands that knew the language of music as intimately as her own heartbeat. In the third row, an elderly man closed his eyes, transported by the unexpected beauty emerging from this unassuming woman. Next to him, a young conservatory student leaned forward, trying to understand how such emotion could come from a piece she had never heard before. And in his seat, Thomas Wells had gone completely still, his earlier skepticism replaced by something rare for him: surprise. The piece moved toward its final section, where Elaine had poured her hope. Not the bright, naive hope of youth, but the weathered, resilient hope that comes from surviving disappointment. The melody became simpler again, echoing the opening theme but transformed, just as she had been transformed by the years of living. As she approached the final measures, Elaine opened her eyes. The hall was silent except for her music. She saw faces looking at her with expressions she had never encountered when introducing herself as just a piano teacher from Pine Ridge. There was respect there, interest, even wonder. The final notes lingered in the air, a question left purposely unanswered. Then silence. For 3 heartbeats no one moved. Then applause erupted, not the polite, obligatory kind that she had heard for the performers before her, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Someone in the balcony stood. Then another person. Soon, much of the audience was on their feet. Elaine sat in shock, her hands still resting on the keys. This couldn't be for her. They must be applauding out of kindness, out of pity for the old woman who had stumbled at the beginning. She rose shakily and offered a small, uncertain bow. As she straightened, she caught sight of Thomas Wells. He wasn't applauding, not yet. Instead, he was looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as if seeing something he had missed before. The stage manager appeared at her side, whispering that she needed to exit so they could prepare for the next portion of the program. Elaine nodded and made her way off stage, her legs unsteady beneath her. In the wings, the young woman with the migraine, Jennifer, was waiting. Her pain apparently eased enough for her to listen. That was... Jennifer shook her head, searching for words. I've never heard anything like it. Did you really write that yourself? Elaine nodded, still dazed by the response. Over many years, yes. But you're not with a conservatory? Or a university? Jennifer's confusion was evident. In her world, talent like that didn't hide in small towns teaching children. No, I just teach piano in Pine Ridge, Elaine replied. Just teach? Came a deep voice from behind them. Elaine turned to find Thomas Wells standing there, his tall figure imposing in the dim backstage light. Mr. Wells, she said, suddenly feeling every bit the outsider again. I'm sorry about the mistake at the beginning. I was nervous. He waved away her apology. Where did you study? The question took her by surprise. Officially? Nowhere special. The community college near Pine Ridge had a music program years ago. I took some classes there. His eyebrows rose. And unofficially? Elaine hesitated. My mother taught at Eastman before she married my father. She was my first teacher. After that, life was my teacher, I suppose. And every student I've had over the years. Thomas Wells looked like a man reevaluating a fundamental assumption. You've never performed professionally? No, she said with a small laugh. Unless you count church services and school functions. But the technical complexity of that final movement. He stopped himself, seeming to come to a decision. Ms. Matthews, the critic from the Times, would like to speak with you. And I believe we should discuss your participation in our upcoming winter showcase. Elaine's heart skipped. Winter showcase? But that's for exceptional musicians, he finished for her. Yes, it is. Before she could respond, the event coordinator appeared, looking flustered. Mr. Wells, they're waiting for you to introduce the orchestra portion. And Ms. Matthews, there are several people asking to speak with you afterward. Thomas nodded briskly. We'll continue this conversation later, Ms. Matthews. Please don't leave after the program without speaking to me. With that, he turned and strode toward the stage. Elaine found herself guided to a small room off the main hallway where she could rest until the end of the event. The coordinator provided her with water and a small plate of refreshments from the reception that would follow the performances. Left alone, Elaine sank into a chair, her hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. She pulled out her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her neighbor, who was watching Beethoven the cat. A text confirmed everything was fine. Beethoven had simply knocked over a plant, nothing serious. The ordinary concern anchored her back to reality. An hour ago, she had been nobody here. Now people wanted to speak with her, including a critic from the Times and Thomas Wells himself. But was this what she wanted? Recognition had never been her goal. Music had been enough. The teaching, the quiet joy of playing for herself, the satisfaction of seeing her students grow. She reached into her purse and pulled out the worn photograph she always carried. Herself as a little girl, sitting at the piano with her mother's hands guiding hers. Her mother had given up a promising career for family, finding joy in a different kind of musical life. Had she ever regretted it? Through the walls, Elaine could hear the orchestra beginning. Soon the event would end and she would need to decide, return to her quiet life in Pine Ridge, or step into something new and uncertain at an age when most people were settling into retirement. She tucked the photograph away and straightened her simple blue dress. Whatever came next, she had done what she came to do. She had played her music, really played it, with all her heart, on the stage where her mother once performed. For now, that was enough. The orchestra's final notes faded into silence, followed by thunderous applause. Elaine listened from her small waiting room, the sound muffled by the thick door. She'd spent the past hour alternating between disbelief and quiet joy, replaying her performance in her mind. Had she really done it? Had she really played her music, pieces of her soul translated to melody on that magnificent stage? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ms. Matthews? The event coordinator peeked in. The reception is starting. Several people are asking for you. Elaine smoothed her dress and checked her appearance in a small mirror on the wall. The face that looked back was the same as always, lined with age, eyes slightly tired, nothing special. Yet something had changed, though not in her reflection. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. The reception was held in a grand hall adjacent to the performance space. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over groups of well-dressed people holding champagne flutes. Conversations hummed, punctuated by occasional laughter. At one end of the room, a small ensemble played background music, beautiful but deliberately unobtrusive, designed to be talked over. When Elaine entered, she expected to slip in unnoticed, as she had done all day. Instead, heads turned. Conversations paused. A path seemed to clear toward her. An older gentleman approached first, leaning slightly on an elegant cane. "Ms. Matthews, what an extraordinary piece. Reminiscent of Chopin in structure, but with a thoroughly modern emotional palette. Where have you been hiding?" Before she could answer, others joined them. A woman with silver hair styled in an elegant updo asked about her composition process. A young man who introduced himself as a composition student at the local conservatory wanted to know if she had published her works. "Published?" Elaine laughed softly. "No, I've never published anything. They're just pieces I wrote for myself." "Just pieces?" A tall woman with striking gray eyes and a press badge joined their circle. "Ms. Matthews, I'm Patricia Winters from the Times." That just piece left half the audience in tears. Elaine blinked in surprise. "Surely you're exaggerating." "I never exaggerate in print or in person," Patricia replied with a small smile. "I'd like to schedule an interview with you. Your story. A hidden talent emerging from..." She glanced at her notes. "Pine Ridge? Where is that exactly?" "About 2 hours north," Elaine explained. "It's small. You'd miss it if you blinked while driving through." "Fascinating," Patricia murmured, jotting something in her notebook. "A hidden musical genius in a town no one's heard of. It's like a film plot." "Oh, I'm not a genius," Elaine protested. "I'm just a piano teacher who likes to compose." "A piano teacher who received a standing ovation at Harrington," corrected a familiar deep voice. The group parted as Thomas Wells joined them, commanding attention effortlessly. Up close, without the distance of the stage between them, Elaine noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the slight silver at his temples that she hadn't seen before. "Mr. Wells," she acknowledged with a small nod. "Your performance was..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Unexpected." In the best possible way. Coming from him, it felt like higher praise than the gushing compliments of the others. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd like to speak with you privately, if you don't mind," he said, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the room. Patricia from the Times looked like she wanted to object, but Thomas Wells had the natural authority of someone used to getting his way. With a promise to find her later, the journalist let them go. As they walked through the crowd, Elaine noticed Jennifer, the young pianist who had been scheduled to play in her slot. The younger woman gave her a genuine smile and a small thumbs up. It was a kind gesture that warmed Elaine's heart. There was no resentment there, only appreciation from one musician to another. Thomas led her to a small alcove where 2 armchairs were positioned near a window overlooking the city lights. Away from the main reception, The sounds of conversation and clinking glasses were muted. "Please, sit," he offered, waiting for her to settle before taking the opposite chair. For a moment he simply studied her, as if trying to reconcile the unassuming woman before him with the music he had heard earlier. "How long have you been composing?" he finally asked. Elaine considered the question.
Formally?
"Never. But I've been writing little pieces since I was a girl. My mother encouraged it. After she passed away, it became a way to remember her, I suppose, to feel connected. And the piece you played today? I started it about 15 years ago after my husband died. It's changed over time as I have." Thomas nodded slowly. "It was extraordinary, Miss Matthews. Not just technically accomplished, but emotionally," he gestured vaguely. And Elaine was surprised to see the usually articulate conductor at a loss for words. "Thank you," she said again, unsure what else to add. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm curious, why haven't you pursued music professionally? With your talent, you could have had a significant career." It was a question Elaine had asked herself many times over the years, especially during long nights when the house was quiet and possibilities seemed to whisper from shadows. "Life happened," she said simply. "My father got sick when I was in my 20s. Someone needed to care for him and keep his small business running. Then I met Robert, fell in love, had my daughter. Pine Ridge needed a piano teacher after the school cut its music program. 1 year turned into 5, then 10, then 30. She smiled faintly. "I don't regret it. I've taught hundreds of children over the years. Some have gone on to do wonderful things with music. But what about your music?" Thomas pressed. "Compositions like the one you played today shouldn't remain hidden in a small town." Elaine looked out at the city lights, considering his words. "Maybe not. But I'm 62, Mr. Wells. Isn't it a bit late to be discovered?" He surprised her with a short laugh. "Ms. Matthews, music doesn't care about birth certificates. Some of the most profound works have come from composers in their later years. Verdi wrote Falstaff at 80. And frankly, what you played today showed more emotional maturity than most of the young prodigies I hear." A warm feeling spread through Elaine's chest. Not just pride, but something like vindication. All those hours composing at her old piano, with only her cat as audience, had not been wasted after all. "I have a proposal for you," Thomas continued. "Our winter showcase features new compositions. We had selected a young composer from the conservatory, but his piece isn't working with the overall program. I'd like to feature your composition instead. Properly orchestrated, of course. We could work together on expanding it." Elaine's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "You want my piece in the winter showcase? But that's your biggest event of the year." "Precisely." His eyes held a challenge. "It would mean committing to weekly sessions here to work on the orchestration. Could you manage that? The drive from Pine Ridge?" Her mind raced through practical concerns. Her students, her schedule, the winter roads that could be treacherous. Yet underneath these thoughts ran a current of excitement she hadn't felt in decades. "I think I could arrange it," she said carefully. "I'd need to reschedule some lessons, but—" A commotion near the main entrance interrupted their conversation. Heads turned as a group of people entered, photographers with cameras, a few people with microphones, and at the center, a tall man with distinctive silver hair that Elaine recognized immediately from television. "Congressman Williams," Thomas muttered, checking his watch, right on time to be fashionably late. The congressman moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and offering perfect camera-ready smiles. He was making his way toward their corner, Thomas realized with resignation. "He's on our board of directors," he explained to Elaine, "and never misses an opportunity for publicity." Sure enough, the congressman approached them, trailed by his entourage. "Thomas, excellent program tonight. The orchestra was superb as always." "Thank you, Congressman," Thomas replied with professional courtesy. "May I introduce Elaine Matthews? She performed an original composition earlier this evening." The congressman turned his practiced smile toward Elaine, then paused, his expression shifting to confusion. "Matthews, you weren't on the program I received." "Last-minute substitution," Thomas explained. "Ms. Matthews filled in when Jennifer Yoon became ill and, frankly, gave the performance of the evening." Elaine felt her face warm at the praise. The congressman studied her with new interest. "Is that so? Well, I'm sorry I missed it. Perhaps next time." He turned back to Thomas. "I need to speak with you about the fundraising gala next month." My office has some concerns about the proposed program. Thomas's expression remained pleasant, but Elaine noticed a tightness around his eyes. Of course. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week. Tonight is about celebrating our musicians. The slight emphasis on musicians wasn't lost on the congressman, whose smile dimmed slightly. Certainly. My assistant will call yours. He nodded politely to Elaine before moving on to greet other important guests. Politics. Thomas sighed once the congressman was out of earshot. Always a delicate balance when your funding depends on people who think they know more about music than you do. Elaine smiled sympathetically. Not so different from teaching piano to children whose parents are convinced their little ones are the next Mozart. Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. Exactly. Now where were we? Ah, yes, the winter showcase. As they continued their discussion, Elaine felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had she imagined a moment like this, sitting with a respected conductor, discussing her music as if it mattered, as if she belonged in this world of crystal chandeliers and important people. Yet now that it was happening, she realized something surprising. She didn't need their validation. The music had always been enough. What Thomas Wells was offering wasn't legitimacy, but simply a chance for her music to be heard by more people. And perhaps, after all these years of helping others find their musical voices, it was finally time for hers to be heard too. The drive back to Pine Ridge stretched before Elaine like a winding dream. Streetlights blurred past her window, each one pulling her further from the gleaming halls of Harrington and closer to her small-town reality. It was nearly midnight, much later than she'd planned to return, but the events of the evening had stretched time in strange ways. Her hands still tingled from the countless handshakes at the reception. Business cards from music publishers, journalists, and fellow musicians weighed down her purse. Most surreal of all was the contract sitting on the passenger seat, an official invitation to have her composition featured in the Harrington Winter Showcase, signed by Thomas Wells himself. As the highway narrowed to country roads, Elaine lowered her window. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and freshly cut hay, so different from the perfumed atmosphere of the reception, with its undertones of expensive cologne and champagne. Did that really happen? She whispered to herself. The stars overhead winked back, silent witnesses to her bewilderment. Her thoughts drifted to her students, wondering what they would say when she told them. Young Lily, who struggled with timing but played with such heart. Old Mr. Peterson, who had started lessons at 70, determined to finally learn the instrument he'd always admired. Would they look at her differently now? Would the parents who sometimes haggled over her already modest lesson fees suddenly decide she was worth every penny? Pine Ridge appeared on the horizon, a scattering of lights nestled against the darkness. Most windows were dark at this hour, the town having settled into sleep hours ago. As she drove down Main Street, past the diner where she had breakfast every Sunday and the small library where she'd volunteered for years, a strange feeling washed over her, like returning to a familiar photograph, only to find the details had subtly shifted. Her small house welcomed her with the soft glow of the porch light. She'd left on that morning, a lifetime ago it seemed. As she turned her key in the lock, a demanding meow greeted her. "Yes, Beethoven, I know it's late," she murmured to the orange tabby winding between her ankles. "Quite the adventure your mom had today." After feeding the indignant cat and changing into her nightgown, Elaine found herself too wired to sleep. She moved to her piano, not the magnificent grand at Harrington, but her faithful upright, slightly out of tune in the upper register but as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Her fingers found the keys without thought, playing softly so as not to disturb her neighbors. The piece that emerged wasn't her showcase composition but something new. Tentative notes that spoke of unexpected crossroads, of doors opening after decades of believing they were locked. Beethoven jumped onto the bench beside her, settling into his accustomed spot. He had been her only audience for so many years, through countless evenings of composition and practice. Now others would hear her music. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed one. Elaine reluctantly closed the piano and headed to bed, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Tomorrow was Tuesday. She had 5 lessons scheduled, beginning with 10-year-old Danny at 4 o'clock. Life would go on as usual, even if she herself had been fundamentally changed. Morning brought reality back into sharp focus. Elaine woke to her usual alarm, made her usual cup of tea, and spent the morning doing her usual household chores. The events of the previous day took on a dreamlike quality, and several times she found herself checking her purse to make sure the business cards and contract were still there. At noon, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with the city's area code. "Ms. Matthews? This is Patricia Winters from the Times." The journalist's crisp voice instantly transported Elaine back to the reception. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Elaine replied, though her heart had begun to race again. "Excellent. I'm working on the article about last night's performance, and I wanted to verify a few details. Your background in music. You mentioned you studied at a community college?" "Yes, just a few courses. This was back in the early 80s, before the program was cut." "And your mother was trained at Eastman?" "Yes, she played flute with the Harrington Orchestra for 3 seasons in the 50s. "Fascinating." The sound of typing carried through the phone. "And you've been teaching piano in Pine Ridge for how long?" "About 35 years now." The questions continued for nearly half an hour, about her composition process, her influences, her students. Elaine answered as honestly as she could, though she felt oddly self-conscious. Her life, when laid out in journalistic shorthand, seemed simultaneously ordinary and improbable. "One last question, Ms. Matthews," Patricia said finally. "What do you hope comes from this sudden recognition?" The question caught Elaine off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to hope for anything. The performance itself had been the fulfillment of a modest dream. What lay beyond it was uncharted territory. "I suppose," she began slowly, "I hope my music might mean something to someone else, the way other composers' works have meant something to me." After hanging up, Elaine sat at her kitchen table, turning the question over in her mind. What did she hope for? At 62, she was well past the age when most musicians launched careers. Did she even want a career? Or was this simply a beautiful moment to be treasured, a rare validation of her private passion? The contract on her counter seemed to watch her, waiting for a decision. Thomas Wells had given her a week to consider his offer. Weekly trips to the city for the next 3 months to work on orchestrating her piece for the winter showcase. It would mean rearranging her teaching schedule, long drives in potentially bad weather, stepping into a world where she was a novice despite her years. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Danny's mother standing there with Danny, 30 minutes early for his lesson. "I'm so sorry to arrive early," the woman said, looking flustered, "but Danny insisted we come right away. He says it's an emergency." Elaine looked down at the boy, whose eyes were wide with excitement. "What's the emergency, Danny?" "Mrs. Becker at the grocery store said you played piano at some fancy place in the city." He blurted out. "She said you got a standing ovation," his mother supplied. "Yeah." "That is it true? Were you on a real stage? Was it scary? Did you mess up? Can you teach me your song?" The barrage of questions made Elaine laugh. "Yes, it's true. And yes to all your other questions too. It was a real stage, it was very scary, I did mess up once, and maybe someday I can teach you part of my song when you're ready." Danny's face lit up. "I knew it. I told Mom you were probably secretly famous." "I'm definitely not famous," Elaine assured him. "Not yet," Danny's mother said with a smile. "But Patricia Winters doesn't interview just anyone for the Times." News traveled fast in Pine Ridge. By the time Danny's lesson was finished, Elaine had received 3 phone calls and 2 text messages from friends and neighbors asking about her performance. Her usual Wednesday night dinner companions, fellow teachers from the local school, had moved their weekly gathering to tonight, clearly eager for details. After her last student left at 7, Elaine changed into a nicer blouse before heading to the diner. As she walked the 3 blocks, several people called out congratulations. Old Mr. Wilson, who had lived across the street for decades, actually tipped his hat to her, something she'd never seen him do. The diner was busier than usual for a Tuesday night. When Elaine entered, conversations paused briefly before resuming with increased energy. Her friends had saved her usual spot in their corner booth, but she noticed extra chairs had been pulled up, expanding their usual circle. "There she is," called Linda, who taught 4th grade math, our town celebrity. Elaine felt her face warm as she slid into the booth. Hardly a celebrity. It was just one performance. One performance that's got the whole town talking, said Ben, the high school physics teacher. He held up his phone. You're trending on local social media. Someone posted a clip from the end of your piece. Just the last minute or so. It's got thousands of views already. What? Elaine stared at him in disbelief. How is that possible? Recording wasn't allowed. Ben turned his phone so she could see the video, shaky footage clearly taken from someone's seat in the audience, capturing the final moments of her performance and the standing ovation that followed. The video quality was poor, but the sound was surprisingly clear, her final notes hanging in the air before the eruption of applause. I had no idea, she murmured, watching her own small figure take a hesitant bow on the screen. The comments are amazing, Linda said, scrolling down. Who is this woman? Does she have an album? I need this music in my life. Read the one from the music professor, Ben suggested. Linda scrolled further. The technical proficiency is impressive, but what strikes me is the emotional authenticity rarely heard in contemporary classical composition. This isn't music written to impress critics or demonstrate theoretical knowledge. It's music written from lived experience, and it's absolutely captivating. Elaine felt tears spring to her eyes. That unknown person had understood exactly what she'd been trying to do with her music, not to impress, but to express, to translate her life into sound. So, prompted Diane, who taught kindergarten, tell us everything. What was it like? What happens next? As Elaine recounted the events of the previous day, the initial dismissal, the unexpected opportunity, the performance, the reception afterward, and Thomas Wells's offer, her friends listened with rapt attention. The waitress brought their usual orders without being asked, then lingered to hear parts of the story. You're going to do it, right? Linda asked when Elaine mentioned the winter showcase contract. You have to do it. I don't know, Elaine admitted. It's a big commitment. The drive every week rearranging students will help, Ben said immediately. I can take over your Thursday students. I may not be you, but I've played enough to handle beginners, and I can drive you some weeks, offered Diane. Make it a girls' day in the city. Elaine looked around, at her friends, at their genuine excitement for her, their unhesitating offers of support. In all her worried calculations about whether she could manage the showcase commitment, she had forgotten this essential truth. She wasn't alone. Pine Ridge might be small, but its heart was large. For the second time in as many days, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet realization that perhaps the most beautiful music yet to come would be a collaboration between her past and future, between the simple life she'd built and the unexpected recognition now being offered. Not a solo, but a symphony of possibilities. 3 months passed like turning pages in a well-loved book, both familiar and surprising with each new chapter. Autumn faded into winter, painting Pine Ridge with frost and occasional dustings of snow. For Elaine, life had taken on a rhythm as complex and beautiful as her compositions. Every Thursday, she made the drive to Harrington Hall, sometimes alone, wrapped in thought and possibility, other times with Diane beside her, the two friends talking and laughing all the way to the city. The first few trips had been intimidating, walking through those grand doors, finding her way to the small office where Thomas Wells waited to work with her. But slowly the strangeness wore away, replaced by a sense of purpose that energized her despite the long hours. Thomas proved to be both demanding and respectful, pushing her to expand her musical ideas while honoring the emotional core of her original composition. Their working relationship evolved from awkward politeness to genuine creative partnership. He never treated her as an amateur who needed guidance, but as a fellow artist whose unique voice deserved amplification. This passage here, he said during one session, pointing to measures she had written decades ago while sitting at her kitchen table. The interplay between hope and melancholy, it's extraordinary. We don't want to overcrowd it with orchestration. Let's keep it intimate, perhaps just strings and a single woodwind. Those Thursdays became sacred hours of creation and discovery. Elaine found herself diving into music theory books between sessions, refreshing knowledge long dormant. Her small house filled with staff paper covered in notes and annotations. Beethoven the cat learned to navigate around stacks of music books that hadn't been opened in years. Back in Pine Ridge, her life transformed in subtle ways. New students appeared, some driving from neighboring towns, having heard about the piano teacher who performed at Harrington. Her usual lesson fees suddenly seemed non-negotiable, accepted without complaint by parents who now viewed her differently. The article in the Times had appeared 2 weeks after her performance, a thoughtful piece highlighting the unlikely path of a small-town piano teacher to one of the country's most prestigious stages. Patricia Winters had been kind in her assessment, calling Elaine's music a reminder that artistic brilliance can flourish anywhere, even when unrecognized by traditional institutions. But fame, even in this modest form, brought complications. Some longtime residents of Pine Ridge seemed uncomfortable with her new status. Mrs. Winters at the post office, who had barely acknowledged Elaine for 20 years, now made a point of mentioning our famous neighbor whenever others were within earshot. Old friendships shifted as some people pulled away while others drew closer. Through it all, Elaine's piano remained her anchor, the place where truth lived, where she could translate her experiences into sound. On difficult days when doubt crept in and she wondered if she had taken a wrong turn by accepting Thomas's offer, she would play for herself, reconnecting with the joy that had sustained her through decades of teaching others, while her own dreams waited patiently. The week before the winter showcase, snow blanketed the region. Elaine stood at her living room window, watching fat flakes swirl in the glow of streetlights. Her phone buzzed with a weather alert. A major storm was expected the day of the performance. Her daughter called that evening from California. "Mom, I booked my flight. I land at noon on Saturday, so I'll have plenty of time to get to Harrington for the showcase." Elaine's heart swelled. Catherine hadn't been home in almost 2 years, her life busy with her own family and career. That she would fly across the country for this performance meant everything. "Are you nervous?" Catherine asked. "Terrified," Elaine admitted with a small laugh. "But ready, I think. Thomas says the orchestra is responding beautifully to the piece." "Of course they are. It's your music, Mom. It's special, just like you always were." The words brought unexpected tears. How often had she wondered if her daughter understood the choices she'd made, the dream she'd set aside to be present as a mother, to care for her own aging parents, to build a life of quiet service through teaching. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Dad would have been so proud," Catherine added softly. "He always said you were the most talented musician he'd ever known." After hanging up, Elaine sat at her piano in the darkened room, playing softly as snow continued to fall outside. Robert had been gone 15 years now, but she could still picture his face clearly, the way he would sit in his favorite chair while she played, eyes closed, completely present in the music. He had never once suggested her talent was wasted in Pine Ridge. Instead, he had built her a life where she could teach, compose, and play, understanding that for her, music wasn't about recognition but about expression. The day of the showcase arrived with clearing skies, the storm having passed through faster than predicted. Harrington Hall was decorated for the holidays, elegant garlands and tasteful lights transforming the already beautiful space into something magical. Backstage was organized chaos, musicians warming up, stage managers checking lighting cues, Thomas Wells moving between groups with focused energy. When he spotted Elaine, he changed direction to greet her. "There you are. How are you feeling?" "Like I might be sick," she admitted, "but in an exciting way." He laughed, a sound she had heard more frequently as they'd worked together. "That's normal. Everyone gets nervous no matter how many times they've performed." He lowered his voice. "Even me. You nervous?" "I don't believe it. Believe it. But here's the secret. The nervousness means you care. It means the music matters." He checked his watch. "We have 30 minutes. The orchestra is ready. Your family is here. My daughter and her husband. Some friends from Pine Ridge, too. They rented a small bus to make the trip together." Thomas smiled. "A built-in cheering section. Perfect." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your piece is the highlight of the program, Elaine. Not because of the story behind it, but because it's exceptional music. Remember that when you're sitting out there listening." Unlike the impromptu performance months ago, tonight Elaine wouldn't be playing. Her composition had been fully orchestrated, transformed from a piano solo into a piece for 40 musicians. She would sit in the audience like any other composer, listening as others brought her music to life. The hall filled quickly, the buzz of conversation,